Hi guys, and welcome to another Baking Gems with Shane. I hope that you're all keeping well. I'll just give it another minute or two just to allow some people to come on. There we are, we have someone in already. Fiona, how are you? Good evening, good evening. I don't want to say it, but I had to get my ring light out because it's getting a little bit dark already. Hi guys, I hope you're all keeping well. I am doing another Q&A today, this evening with Gem Foods, talking all about baking substitutions, what you can use instead of a certain ingredient, what will work, what won't work. Trust me, I've probably tried them all 100 times. So again, if you have any questions, please do pop them into the little question bar down below. If you can give me a little wave or a little heart, or just let me know that you can hear me okay, that would be amazing. I always have that fear that I'm just going to be talking in silence to myself and people are like, what's he chatting about? So yes, we got some lovely questions in from people over the last couple of days on Instagram, just asking questions about what they can use instead of certain things. Norma, thank you so much for your little heart. I presume that you can hear me okay. Amazing. Okay. Firstly, if you want to comment down below, let me know where you're tuning in from. I always like to gauge where it is everyone is watching from, whether that's Ireland or abroad or from your couch or wherever that is. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from. And again, please fire any questions that you have in the question bar below, or if you've ever tried to substitute one ingredient with another and it did work or it didn't work, I would love to hear that as well. It's always good to share these little tips. I always find a lot of these things you kind of learn by default as well. Go on, Letterkenny. Love Donegal. I went to college in Donegal for 2 years up in Killybegs. So yeah, it was amazing. Amazing county. I love it. Still have great friends up there. So yes, we're going to get started. So before I kick off, I just want to let you all know, obviously I am Gem Foods brand ambassador, Shane Smith, and I am delighted to be doing this Q&A series with them. I think this is our fourth. I think it's the fourth. Offaly, go on Offaly, yes, fingers crossed you keep your signal. You can dip in and out. I'll know what's happening if I see you joining again. But yes, if you haven't seen it or spotted it on the Gem page, they are running an extremely exciting competition that finishes at midnight tomorrow. So it's to be in with a chance of winning a beautiful Gem hamper. So they have 5 hampers to give away, and that is jam-packed full of delicious Gem ingredients. And it comes with Gem apron, a little baking set, yeah, really good competition. So if you are watching this now after the live, you can head on over there and enter the competition. That does finish at midnight tomorrow, Tuesday the 23rd. I had to check my dates there as well. Always find muffins in tins come out with damp bases, even though in papers. Tips welcome, thanks. We actually, would you believe, we touched on this in a previous Gem Q&A, and I gave away a little life hack that I spotted online, probably at about 2 o'clock in the morning when I was scrolling on my phone, when I do see these little videos online. But if you put some uncooked rice into the bottom of your baking tin, and then put your paper case in and your muffins, and then just carry on as normal, you don't get that greasy base or that bottom. Again, some recipes call for oil, some recipes call for butter, so that can depend as well. But next time when you are baking, just put a good pinch of raw uncooked rice into the base of your tin, and then put your paper cases on top of that. Fill them with your cupcakes and bake them as normal, same time temperature, and that should reduce the level of oil and kind of, I suppose, grease as well that comes out on the bottom. So yeah, you can try that out. So yeah, if you are watching again, pop on over to you're on the Gem page later on, check out the competition that does end tomorrow, so you could be able to chance of winning a amazing Gem hamper. So now I'm going to jump into the questions here, guys. Again, if you have any questions yourselves, please do drop them into the comment section. I'll keep an eye on it here. If not, I will start with my first question here. We have coming in from Sinead. Sinead wants to know, can she substitute baking soda, so bicarbonate of soda, with baking powder? Short answer to this would be no. Well, not equal measures anyways, okay? So the difference is with baking powder and bread soda is bicarbonate of soda Oh, that sounds great. Thanks so much. No problem at all. My pleasure. Bernie on 5, nice for joining us as well. So yes, if you are looking at baking powder and bread soda, so bicarbonate of soda or bread soda needs an acid to activate. And again, that releases carbon dioxide and that gives you a lovely light bake. But when you are using bread soda, you're going to need either natural yogurt, lemon, buttermilk, some sort of acid to kickstart your bread soda. Where your baking powder is a combination of both your bicarb of soda and an acid. So it just needs some moisture and some heat, and that's where your baking powder will activate straight away, whether it's wet or whether it's with heat, and that will activate your baking powder, where your bread soda does need an acid, so you can't swap them out. Later on, just before I finish up, I have a little chart that I'm going to go through of substitutions, what you can do if you don't have one thing. So again, this will be saved on the Gem page. So if you are watching this live or a rerun, just wait to the end and I'll just give a little list of stuff that you can use, because I think we've all opened the press and reached for something and went, ugh, I was 100% sure I had baking powder there, or I had this and such, and it's either out of date or it's just not there. So again, these little tips and tricks, I will go through them. So what I would say to you is that you can use an extra amount of baking powder to substitute bread soda or bicarbonate of soda, but you can swap the other one around. So just to keep that in mind as well. I will be going through that in more detail. So Sharon has asked, when baking, can I substitute whole wheat flour for all-purpose flour? So a lot of these, I suppose, will depend solely on the recipe. So what I would say to you is that if you are using or looking for a light bake, whatever that may be, whether it's a sponge, whether it's cookies, I would say that you shouldn't substitute whole wheat flour, because what happens is with whole wheat flour, it contains your wheat bran, your wheat germ, which soak up a lot of liquid. Your plain flour or self-raising flour is processed, so it's kind of removed all of that. So you need a lot more liquids to balance out a wholemeal flour. So again, if you want to make like pancakes or a bread, you're generally using a lot more liquids. So I think you can get away with it more in that regard. But if you want something light and airy, like a nice Genoese sponge or a nice sponge for a Swiss roll, I would say that no, whole wheat flour will just absorb whatever liquid you're putting into that recipe, and you'll need more, and it can change the texture and it can be quite dry and flaky. So for kind of more robust bakes like breads and bakes that have a lot of liquid, you can substitute a little bit of wholemeal flour. What I would say, substitute about 25% of the white flour for wholemeal, again in a recipe that calls for a lot of liquids. Next question is in from Eamon, and Eamon wants to know, when baking, can I substitute oil for butter? Again, Eamon, what I would say to you here is this will depend on the recipe, okay? Because oil and butter both play key roles in baking. They obviously help with the mouthfeel, with the texture, by keeping cakes nice and moist. So again, what I would say to you is double check your recipe. If your recipe calls for your butter and your sugar to be creamed together, like most sponges or cookies do, then I would say straight away, no, you can't substitute it, because you're not going to get that volume of creaming your oil and your sugar together than you would with a butter and sugar mix, okay? So if it's kind of like an all-in-one method, you can try it out. But if your recipe does call for butter and sugar creaming, a creaming method, then I would say oil will not substitute. So again, just to be wary of that. Okay, next one we have here, this comes in from Helena. Helena wants to know, what can I use instead of oil? We've got a trend here tonight with oil. Again, guys, anyone that's watching, welcome. I'm just going through some baking substitution questions. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. We have Tipperary and we have Letterkenny so far. Everyone else has been extremely shy. Oh, you're in the witness protection. You don't want to let me know where you are. But let me know if you have any questions and I'll try and answer them to the best of my ability. So Helena has just asked here, these are questions that we gathered over the weekend on Instagram. What can I use in oil in a recipe if I don't have oil, basically? So there's lots of things that you can reach for that will help. So you have like an apple puree or a fruit puree, like banana purees and stuff, that can help add moisture and keep a cake nice and soft. Some melted butter instead of oil. Even I have a recipe and I need to dig it out, and I keep talking about it, and every time I mention it, people look at me like I'm insane. It's using mayonnaise, and it's a beautiful chocolate sponge cake, but it uses mayonnaise in it. You have absolutely no flavor of the mayonnaise at all. I think that's where people are like, really? But it just adds the most beautiful texture to the cake. I have that in my folder upstairs, and I keep threatening to look for it. I need to dig that one out and share that one online. But yeah, it's basically a chocolate sponge with mayonnaise in it, and it's so good. I haven't made that in ages, so that is definitely on my to-do list. So there's just a couple of things, Helena, that you can use instead of oil if you don't have it. Next question come in here, we didn't have a name, but the question is, can I substitute white sugar for brown or demerara sugar, and how does this affect the end result? So what I would say to you is, in relation to sugars, if you're looking for a nice light, whether it's a meringue or something, obviously your caster sugar, your granulated sugar is processed. So the molasses has been removed. So obviously you see your light brown sugars, and like Gem have a stunning range of sugars. You name it, they have it really. So they have light brown sugar, they've got soft dark sugar, they've got the granulated sugar, demerara sugar, muscovado, icing caster, or the preserving sugar, jam sugar. There's so many. But obviously, just keeping in mind is, depending on the color of your bake. So if you want to make a nice meringue and you want to have it nice and white, then I would say then obviously you're going to need to stick to either granulated caster ideally. So you can substitute it. Now I have made brown sugar meringues before and they have worked out. But again, what I would say to you is you will get more of a caramel molasses flavor with the darker you go in the sugar. So obviously with light brown to a demerara to a dark brown sugar, you will get that caramel notes in there when you are baking. So just to keep that in mind. But you absolutely can switch around your sugars. Just again, keep in mind that the kind of darker you go sometimes in them, they can be quite, I suppose, the grains are not as individual. It can be quite packed together and it can be a little bit firmer. So that will have an effect. But if you are looking for that really rich, decadent fudgy kind of consistency in a brownie or a cookie or even Christmas cakes or puddings, shouldn't have mentioned the C word, that's way too early, but you can use the brown sugar and that's a really nice touch. Okay, next question here comes in from Chris. Can I substitute eggs in a recipe? This is one I get asked a hell of a lot. Again, what I would say to you, Chris, is this will depend on the recipe itself. If you're making a sponge or banana bread or something like that, there is a little bit more leeway to play around with, where you can kind of switch out the egg and you can add in a little bit of yogurt, or you can add in a little bit of milk if you're making some cookies. I only made a batch of cookies the last day and I went to reach for eggs and I had none, I was all out. So I used a dash of milk instead. So I need one egg, which is generally around 50 grams, and I just substituted that with milk. It might have been a little bit heavier, but it still worked. So that's just to keep that in mind. You can go down the route of adding in like flaxseed. So you can get a flax powder, and that's really good as well. That's an egg substitute. Or you can actually use the chickpea water. I think that's quite common as well. So just your general chickpeas, if you even soak them overnight, or if you buy the tinned, if you just strain that, the liquid that you get back from the chickpea water is a really good substitute when you're making even pavlovas or cookies, whatever. That's a really good one. Denise has asked, what is bread flour and how do I use it? Okay, so bread flour, this is the one thing with flour, there's so many different names, especially when you're looking at recipes online that are Irish and UK European recipes to that of the American recipes. So what I would say, if you see a recipe that calls for bread flour, that is actually strong flour. Okay, so bread flour is really good if you're doing some yeasted bakes, if you're making some yeasted breads, pizza dough, things like that. So bread flour would be strong flour because it has a higher amount of gluten in there, so it's much more elastic, and the more you work it, the stronger the gluten gets, and then it rises better and all that. So what I would say to you is though, I generally find, depending on your bake, whether it's a cinnamon roll, whether it's a brioche that you're making, I do generally use plain flour for most things, unless I'm making like a focaccia or a really strong white yeasted bread that calls, or pizza dough for 00 flour pasta. kind of specific like that. If you want to bake and you want to make cinnamon rolls or like those kind of little breakfast pastries, and the recipe calls for bread flour or strong flour, which we know it better as in Ireland. What I would say to you is you can substitute in your plain flour for that. So Gem have the range of plain and self-raising. Just you can use the plain flour. I would substitute a lot of my bakes because strong flour sometimes is a little bit harder to find in the shops. So again, if you have plain flour in the house, just reach for it instead. It does contain gluten, not as much as a strong flour, but it does the job. And what I find sometimes is that you actually get a softer result. So by using a plain flour instead of a strong, in cinnamon rolls, in brioches, you get a softer crumb, which is really, really nice. So I hope that answers your question, Denise. Where are we here now? We have Mary wanted to know, what can I substitute for sugar in a recipe? And this is one I always get asked. And it's such a hard one to call because I have tried so many times before to bake with less sugar, reduced sugar, and you can 100%. But your results are going to vary. So if your recipe calls for straight up caster sugar, granulated sugar, brown sugar, and you want to swap that out for honey or maple syrup, you are going to have to test the recipe because you can't take out 100 grams of granulated sugar and add in 100 grams of honey, because I've done that before and I've tested it. It will burn a lot faster. I just find you're adding in the honey in there, whether it's to a cookie or a bread or a sponge. I've tried it before with sponges and it has risen and sank in the middle. Again, because the texture is different than you get from honey and from sugar. So what I would say to you is, obviously, you can add in, I have a list here, maple syrup, you have dates, and you can add in fruit juices. Again, banana puree is really good. Nectar, like again, there's lots of things you can pick up in the health food store that will substitute, again, I suppose, the sweetness now, which is really, really good. But if you're looking to swap it out weight for weight, I would say you most definitely have to test your recipe beforehand, okay? Okay, now I did talk earlier that I have a lovely list here. I'm just going to pull it up. And this is baking substitutes, okay? So if you don't have this particular ingredient, what you can do is reach for something else. So I'm just going to go through these here now. And again, guys, if you have any questions whatsoever, fire them into the comment section below, and I will do my best for to answer them. So far, you're all very shy tonight, or this evening. We have Offaly and Letterkenny watching in. Anyone else from around the country? I'm just pure nosy. That's all it is, really. I'm just dying to know where people are tuning in from. I had somebody watching the last day from India, and that just made my evening. It made my evening. So yeah, you don't have to go that far afield, even if you're just down the road. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. And again, if you have any questions whatsoever, this video will be saved back. So again, these little lists that I'm going to go through now, this will all be saved on the Gem page. So if your recipe calls for buttermilk, we have Cavan on the map. Bernie 5 is from Cavan. Well done there. We got Jenny Lynch, not very exotic. Baldoyle in Dublin. Love Baldoyle. Lovely now. Look at this now. We're getting a good mix of people in now. And it is exotic. I've been to Baldoyle during the summer. Like, you could absolutely be in Majorca or somewhere, Jenny. So we are going with buttermilk. So if you don't have buttermilk, what can you do instead? You can actually just grab regular milk, full fat milk, and add a squeeze of fresh lemon juice, or perhaps not everyone has lemons around the house, but you generally have vinegar for the fish and chips. So you can add in a drop of like a teaspoon of vinegar or lemon juice to your regular milk. Always better if it's at room temperature. So take your milk out, let it sit until it becomes ambient, drop in your vinegar or your lemon juice, and it will kind of split a lot faster when it's at room temperature. So that is one to use as well. Clonard, lovely part of the country too. County Meath. We have a good mixed bag in today. We'll try to do the 32 counties, will we? We're well on the way. So what was I going to say? Yeah, so that is a little substitute. Again, what you can do is, if you're really, really stuck, is some Greek yogurt instead. So you can use some natural yogurt in place of your buttermilk. What I would say to you is it is thicker, so you might need to let it down just a little bit, because that will, I suppose, change the consistency of your bake. Butter, I don't have butter, what can I use instead? So you can reach for, again, these are all depending on the recipe. I'm not saying that these work for every single recipe because baking is so specific. You've got coconut oil, you can use vegetable oils, and there is actually really, really good dairy-free olive oil spreads and butters that work really well. I actually used one, it's a while back, and it was ghee. And it's like an Indian, they use a lot in India for cooking. So basically it's butter that's heat treated. Separate all the milk solids. You see that when you melt butter down, you have like the white and milky frothy parts, and then you have your clarified butter. So basically ghee is a clarified butter, and it's really good if you're dairy intolerant. So you can use that in your baking as well. So basically it is heat treated. All of the milk solids are removed from the butter, and you're just left with the pure clarified butter. It's a beautiful color. And you can actually use it like oil. You can actually deep fry in it. You can shallow fry. And it's really good in baking as well. So if you are dairy intolerant, that is one just to keep in mind. There's a lot of, I suppose, mainstream brands that do it now. So again, just check that out in the refrigeration section of your local supermarket. And it's called ghee. It's like a clarified butter. It's really good as well. Light brown sugar, dark brown sugar. So I kind of touched on that earlier on. Again, if you are looking for sugar substitute, you can substitute light soft brown sugar for caster sugar. It's going to change the flavor of your bake, and it's going to change the color of your bake, so keep that in mind. But generally your bake still will work out. Now if you're really pushed and you want to use some dark sugar, what you can do is just if you have granulated or caster sugar, and just add in a teaspoon of treacle or molasses, and you're going to get that color payoff, and you're going to get that lovely flavor payoff as well. Not too much, just a little bit in there, and that will help if you're looking for the color and flavor payoff. Eggs, I have just touched on there. So again, you can use fruit purees, you can use some dairy, flaxseed, chickpea water is very good for that as well. If you're looking to use cream in a recipe, now what I would say for this one here, this would be pouring cream into a recipe, not using a whipped cream. And you see some American buttercreams actually use the addition of cream, or some sponges use the addition of cream. So again, you can use some milk with a little bit of butter in there just to raise the fat content. Greek yogurt and whole milk mixed together, add that into your bake. Again, that is to substitute pouring cream, not whipped cream. Now this is the one that we're going to touch on here. That's going to, I always get them confused, is the baking powder and bread soda, or bicarbonate of soda. I touched on this at the very beginning. I'm going to take a drink for this one. So if you want to substitute, you need baking powder in a recipe, and you go to reach for some and you don't have any, what you can do is you can actually, if you don't have baking powder, will you have cream of tartar? That is the question. The chances are, if you don't have baking powder, you may not have cream of tartar. But if you wanted to make baking powder, what you can do is blend together a bicarbonate of soda or bread soda and cream of tartar. Sometimes people use cream of tartar when they're whipping up egg whites just to stabilize them. We have, if I'm using coconut oil instead of butter, do I use the same quantity? Again, what I would say, that will depend on the recipe. If you're making a recipe that calls for the butter and sugar to be creamed together, I would say that you definitely have to use the coconut oil as a solid and not melted. And even at that, it may not work. But if your recipe calls for the butter to be melted and added in to enrich a sponge, then absolutely you can try that out. But again, if it's cold set butter been whipped for the creaming method, you're going to have to try that out. Butter substitutes is a tricky one. But again, if your recipe calls for the butter to be used as a melted element to the bake, then melted coconut oil should work in its place for that. So back to our baking powder. If you wanted to make a baking powder, that is a blend. Generally speaking, it's about, for 1 teaspoon of baking powder, it's about a 1/4 teaspoon of soda and 1/2 teaspoon of cream of tartar. Again, as I said, cream of tartar is generally used to stabilize egg whites and whisk. So that's, as I said, if you don't have baking powder, are you going to have cream of tartar? Maybe you might. I could be wrong there. Bicarbonate of soda or bread soda. If you want to make that, but you have none in the house, what I would say to you is, and again, this is a last resort. It doesn't always turn out the best, but for 1 teaspoon of bread soda or bicarbonate of soda, use 4 level teaspoons of baking powder. So you're kind of increasing that a lot. But you obviously, as I explained earlier on, baking powder is a blend of bicarbonate of soda and an acid. Okay, so it needs that acid to work. But again, your recipe then may call for acid in there if you're going to be using bicarbonate of soda. So it is a tricky one to play around with. But it's a last chance scenario. If you're probably better off tipping down the shop. But if you can't, 4 level teaspoons of baking powder in place of 1 teaspoon of bread soda. Honey. So if you want to use, or do you know what, actually a lot of recipes call for invert sugar, and again it's kind of if you're moving up the technical ladder in baking, and it can be used in a lot of recipes for in American recipes, you can just substitute. If you see something called invert sugar, you can just use honey instead. It works really, really well. But again, if you are looking to use honey and you don't have it, you can grab some glucose syrup, corn syrup, they call it in America, but it's always really good to have. So you can have a light corn syrup and you have a dark corn syrup. It's actually really good to have those in the press. They work out really well if you're making any sort of a boiled sugar or even a honeycomb. It works out really well. What else do we have here? Lemon juice. So if you don't have lemon juice, for 1 teaspoon of lemon juice, you can use half a teaspoon of vinegar, 1 teaspoon of white wine. So again, that is just a substitute that you can use if you are a little bit stuck. Sour cream. If you don't have sour cream, if you're making a nice muffin or some sort of a bread that calls for sour cream, you can exchange that out for plain yogurt. So yogurt works really well there as well. And what else do we have? I think that is all. And then again, yogurt, if you're using yogurt in a bake and you don't have it, you can substitute that out for, again, vice versa, sour cream or 1 or equal amounts of buttermilk. That works really well. So that's it, folks. That is a full breakdown. We had a few questions in. Thank you very much for those who asked me some questions. Again, before I wrap it up, I'm just letting you know that the competition that Gem is currently running on their Instagram page for 5 bumper packed Gem hampers. They have loads of delicious baking ingredients in there. They have little silicone baking mats. And what else? They have aprons. They have a beautiful recipe card. I created a gorgeous recipe this month for them. It's a carrot and raisin muffin. Absolutely gorgeous for back to school lunchbox. Really, really easy. Very, very easy to make. And like most muffins, personally, I find that they taste better the day after or the following day. So you can actually bake them well in advance. You're very welcome. No problem at all. Thank you for your questions. So yeah, that competition is currently running over on the Gem page, and it is running up until tomorrow evening or tomorrow night at midnight. So that is Tuesday, just in case you're watching this back, the 23rd of August. So again, that's when the competition ends. But again, really good competition if you want to jump in there. Jenny, you're very welcome. Beautiful Baldoyle. I definitely need to come and visit soon. So yes, that is all, folks. I hope that helped. I hope that Norman, no problem at all. Have fun up there in Letterkenny. Yes, I hope that answered some of your questions. And again, if you are watching this as a rerun down the line, don't be afraid to comment on the comment section below. And some of us, myself, or some of the amazing team over in Gem will get back to you. But that's all, folks. I'm going to go out for a walk, enjoy what's left of the sunshine. And I hope that you all have a lovely evening. And I'll talk to you all soon.